Traditionally, the term executioner refers to the person who carries out death sentences, capital punishments. In classical iconography, the executioner is that character, sometimes bare-chested, but always with a black hood on his head. It was said in ancient times that this was a precaution so that the condemned person could not see the face of the man who would take his life, and maybe cast a curse on him, or, once he reached the afterlife, whisper his name so that he would be damned forever. Of course, these are superstitions, but for a long time, human reason was clouded by superstitions, and so the executioner's black hood remained in the collective imagination. But Boya is also a title that has historically been given to dark figures, people who dedicate their existence to assassination, torture, and mass murder. Executioners are dark figures, people who are sometimes seen as monsters with human features. Monsters who, however, when the time comes to pay the price for what they've done, no, they don't want to pay and try to escape justice, fully aware that they have committed monstrous acts. Sometimes life still presents them with the bill in some form. Other times, it lets them go free for too long, and that bill is only settled in the end. This is the case of a man with many names, a man who, for a certain period, calls himself Altman, but that's not his real name. A man who, for a long period of his life, lived in South America, getting into all sorts of trouble, hiding from a very dark past, but presenting himself as an even more mysterious character. Hands always dripping with blood, a man who was only called to answer for what he had done in the final stage of his life, and who, even though he was in front of a court, kept mocking justice, trying in every way to escape justice, until, as we said, history and life finally presented him with the bill to pay. A man named Nicholas Klaus Barbie. Our story starts in the early 1980s. It's a bit late, but it helps to reconnect the thread of this character's existence. At the beginning of the 1980s, something happens in Bolivia. Bolivia, as we know, is a country in South America, which, like many other countries in the region, went through a very turbulent period in the last century, with many military dictatorships, with guerrilla warfare, with many people killed. So, what's happening in Bolivia? In 1981, a military revolt, overthrew a dictatorial government, the Garcia government. After that, military governments rapidly succeeded each other, each short-lived. Because, as we know, the military are quick to seize power, but most of the time they don't know what to do with it. They keep making political mistakes. This was also seen several decades earlier in Portugal, where the military had crushed democracy, and after not knowing what to do for so long, they turned to Antonio Salazar, who started his own very personal dictatorship. In Bolivia, however, there is no Salazar, no Franco. There is no one among the military who knows what to do with that power. No one knows how to solve the serious economic problems gripping the South American country at that time. What does the military end up doing? Nothing, or rather, after not even 2 years, they decide to reconvene parliament. So basically to hand power back to the people's representatives, as if nothing had happened. Incredible, isn't it? Well, in October 1982, the Bolivian Congress regained full powers, which had previously been limited by the presence of a dictator, the dictator Garcia and Herman Siles. Suazo becomes president again. He had already served as president before in 1957. With the full return of democracy, with the beginning of a transition phase towards complete freedom, Bolivia is going through a phase of self-criticism about everything that happened in the previous decades. And it also grants the extradition of a man arrested for fraud, but the extradition was not requested for the crime of fraud. It was requested for the crimes of kidnapping, torture, and murder. Crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity. Very serious charges that in the end, by 1983, could no longer be ignored. The Bolivian judiciary grants the extradition of this man, a man named Nicolas, known as Klaus Barbie, a man who had entered Bolivia several decades earlier with a false passport, a convenient identity. And by taking advantage of both his friendships and collaboration with the American military services, as well as the escape routes organized in Europe, from the network set up by former Nazi officials and by a priest, Father Krunoslav Draganovic. We have already talked about this in a dedicated video that I invite you to watch again. If you don't know him, Father Draganovic was one of the Ustasha war criminals, a member of Ante Pavelić's regime, who helped hundreds of criminals escape to South America. Nazi war criminals and criminals against humanity, helping them evade the courts and post-war justice. Klaus Barbie was a man on the run several decades before his extradition. He was already a fugitive in 1951. Actually, even before that, if you want. Much earlier, Klaus Barbie was hiding, yes, in 1945 in Asia, where a network of former Nazis had established themselves and later offered their services as collaborators to the Counterintelligence Corps, the American Military Counterintelligence, which later evolved and changed its name at that time. But why did the Americans accept the proposal of a Nazi on the run and his friends? Let's go even further back in time. Let's go back to the 1930s when Klaus Barbie was little more than a boy. Just over 20 years old, unemployed, with nothing to do, he joined the Nazi Party. At first, he joins the Sturmabteilung and works as a guard in the early concentration camps, where he stands out for his brutality. Soon after, he moves to the SS, shortly before the Great Purge of the Night of the Long Knives. Klaus Barbie is a laborer of violence. He's not just a thug, he's much worse. He is a man who knows how to serve pain, physical pain. He knows how to inflict pain on people in the most gruesome ways. And this particular talent of his brings him to France in 1940. France is largely occupied by the German army. In the spring and early summer of 1940, and starting from that summer, Klaus Barbie is in Lyon, in what is known as Vichy France, the collaborationist regime of Pétain. We talked about it briefly in other videos. There, Klaus Barbie sets up a section of the Sicherheitsdienst, the security service, a name that actually hides a repressive police apparatus, an apparatus in charge of violence, an activity that had Klaus Barbie, until the summer of 44, became synonymous with terror in his headquarters. Established in a hotel in the city, he built torture chambers, because for Klaus Barbie there is no other way to extract reliable information except by torturing. And who tortures the passers-by? Klaus Barbie has a truly chilling method for choosing his victims. His patrols roam the streets, arrest the first person they see, and take him to the Sicherheitsdienst headquarters in Lyon. They hand him over to Klaus Barbie and his team, who from that moment on resort to the worst kinds of torture. They tear out fingernails and toenails, beat on the joints, use waterboarding, freezing, whipping with electric cables, or even the electrodes themselves, until the prisoner gives up, until he says everything he knows. If it's something insignificant, it doesn't matter much. But if he does know something, then at that moment, just to make that excruciating pain stop, to end the constant torture, he'll say everything, absolutely everything. And in this way, Klaus Barbie becomes the butcher of Lyon, and also the first partisan hunter in France. Number One confirms this label by capturing Jean Moulin, the head of the French resistance, along with a couple of his collaborators. Jean Moulin will die at the hands of Klaus Barbie and his torturers. He will be killed precisely through continuous torture. Jean Moulin will become a symbol, but he won't be the only man killed by Klaus Barbie. There will be hundreds of them. Barbie also orders hangings. He lets the Panzer Reich Division carry out entire massacres of prisoners. He's an executioner, but he's not a great detective. In fact, we've already seen this when talking about Colonel Frederick Thomas, the White Rabbit. Sometimes he finds the partisans, or, as in the case of Thomas, the British agents just a few meters away. He doesn't recognize or capture them at first. He catches them later through tips, since he also sets up double agent Frenchmen who inform him, in exchange maybe for some kind of comfort or pass or other favors. Frederick is captured by Barbie's men, taken not to Lyon, but to Avenue Foch in Paris, where other men of Barbie torture him, not to death, but they torture him continuously. We've already talked about him in a dedicated video. You can go watch it again on our channel. Klaus Barbie spends this long period torturing and killing a lot of people until his torture paradise comes to an end. Because by September 44, the war is already lost for Germany. The Allies have already entered Paris, and in the south of France, they've landed with Operation Dragoon. So, what does Barbie do? Does he burn? He burns the entire Lyon archive, has all the French collaborators who might have known him killed, and even has the last prisoners from his prison, his personal torture victims, murdered. And he escapes to Germany, seeks refuge among friends and family, even tries to change his identity, until he is discovered by the Americans in Hesse. And there, Barbie decides to serve a new master. Barbie knew Americans didn't trust the Soviets, and that with the war over, a new conflict was starting. The Cold War, the distant standoff between East and West. A war in which men like Barbie can be of some use. For years, from 1946 to 1951, Klaus Barbie and his associates worked for the Counterintelligence Corps, identifying suspected communist agents and German trade unionists. Some are arrested, others are investigated, and some disappear without a trace. Some say they were kidnapped and killed, always tortured by Barbie and his associates. Meanwhile, the French, who are indeed allies of the Americans, have not forgotten everything that happened during the war. They start investigating Klaus Barbie, whose name appears on a very long list of wanted men. It's an endless list that includes Jay Larkin, Martin Bormann, Heinrich Müller, the former Gestapo head who vanished in Berlin, was later revealed to be dead, with no further news about him, but also many others, such as Auschwitz's infamous doctor, Joseph Mengele. Not only them, but those who vanished without a trace and must answer for their actions. Barbie's name is also on that long list. In 1951, she was dropped by the County Intelligence Corps, which considered the use of that low-level labor no longer necessary. From that moment on, Barbie is a man on the run. And how does Barbie escape? Where does he escape to? He escapes through Bavaria, where he had already moved his family, protected by the Americans, Austria, Italy. He also arrives in Merano, that beautiful town in the province of Mercure. Thermal Merano is a sorting center for Organisation der ehemaligen SS-Angehörigen, the organization of former SS members. Here, Barbie comes into contact with the networks, organized by Father Krunoslav Draganovich, that route called the Monastery Route or Rat Line, which passes through convents and churches and leads from South Tyrol to Genoa. With a Red Cross passport, the Red Cross, under his name Klaus Altman, Klaus Barbie, he boards a ship to Argentina. With him, besides the Red Cross passport, he has two other documents. A letter of introduction signed by Father Draganovich himself, who had first helped him pass through Italy and then got him the travel ticket, and a document signed by a guardian of the community, Father Rocky Romau. Well, with these documents, Altman, or rather Barbie, applies for entry into Bolivia, which is granted to him. In fact, on March 16, 1951, Barbie boards a steamship, the Corrientes, in Genoa and sets off for Buenos Aires. From Argentina, he goes to Bolivia, where he arrives in 55, and 2 years later he acquires Bolivian citizenship still using that false name, Klaus Altmann. He also claims to be a mechanic from Brasov, a large town in Romania that during the war was home to a significant German community. Obviously, it's all lies, it's all made up. What matters to Barbie is building a new life with his new name and continuing to do what he does best. Yeah, because in Bolivia, Barbie doesn't just sit around. Within just a few months, he gets involved with the local military who are backed by American intelligence in the coup led by Luis Garcia, Meza Tejada, and he's the one who carries out everything that could help the new regime. A regime that is essentially based on two pillars. The first is drug trafficking. Bolivia produces cocaine, coca leaves that are then processed and sold on the drug market, and these are used to support the regime's war effort. Fear is the second main pillar that the Bolivian military junta uses against the campesinos, the farmers, the students, and anyone who might oppose them. Fear. A crazy fear. A fear that is spread by people just like Klaus Barbie, also known as Altmann, who works with the worst dictators, with Garcia, with Ortuño, with all the Bolivian generals who follow one after another. Garcia later returns to power, even later on, leading the country. And what does Barbie do for them? On one hand, he takes part in smuggling. He participates in his own way. He sets up a trading business and then gets himself appointed president of the state navigation company, the Transmaritima. With that, Barbie starts a major trafficking operation, not only of drugs, but also of weapons. And as for the rest, he takes care of eliminating all the troublesome people. It is said that Barbie himself was involved in the hunt for Ernesto Che Guevara, the Argentine revolutionary who had been a symbol of the Cuban Revolution, and that he had moved to Bolivia to try to urge the population to rebel against the military. It seems that there is also Barbie's trace, his fingerprints clearly appearing on the capture and death of Che Guevara in La Higuera in 1967. What is certain, however, is that there are real traces and actual fingerprints of Barbie on the capture and death by torture of Monica Hertel, a German girl, a girl who was also the daughter of a German who had emigrated because of the war. Her father was a cameraman very close to the Nazi regime and feared he would have to pay a heavy price, even though he was not directly involved in the regime's atrocities. Monica Hertel had traveled back and forth between Bolivia and West Germany, carrying forward the idea of revolution. Monica Hertel, she knew Klaus Altmann, also known as Barbie. She called him Uncle Klaus, and that uncle decided to kidnap Monica Hertel and kill her. To kill her with savage torture and brutal acts that we cannot describe out of respect for the victim. The details Monica Hertel's crime was that she killed in 1971 in Hamburg with 3 gunshots. Roberto Quintanilla, who led the hit squad that tracked down and killed Ernesto Che Guevara, the man who had himself photographed with Guevara's corpse in that famous picture. For this, Monica Hertel had to die. Barbie had taken it upon himself to find her, lure her into a trap, and kill her. And even though Monica's father had learned of his daughter's disappearance, Uncle Klaus denied until the very end not only being involved in her disappearance, but also knowing where she was buried. A monster and executioner, Klaus Barbie, whose traces were never lost. An executioner whom French justice kept searching for, despite various obstacles from Bolivia, but also from the United States. An executioner also sought by German justice, by the Sieg Commission of Duisburg, by the Attorney General of Munich, and by a pair of Nazi hunters. The Klausfeld couple, Terz Rumeno and Bite, his German wife who finally tracked down Klaus Barbie in Bolivia at the beginning of 1972. They also discovered his pseudonym, Altman, and with that very substantial dossier on him, they submitted an extradition request to the Bolivian government, which of course shrugged it off. He was too useful. Klaus Barbie was doing the dirty work. He was doing what the torturers of Augusto Pinochet in Chile or those of Videla and Galtieri in Argentina would later do. He was doing the cleaning according to the Bolivian military. He was doing a job that no one else would have wanted to do. In the meantime, Barbie felt so safe. He even gave interviews to the press. In an interview with Estado do Brasil, he claimed that he, Klaus Altman, was actually Klaus Barbie. He said, "I have nothing left to lose, and I'm fine here." He even went on to say later that he was proud of what he had done during the war, that in the end, France should have thanked him, not persecuted him. According to Barbie, if he hadn't acted as an executioner, arresting, torturing, and killing person after person, France would have become a Marxist republic, or even a Union of Soviet Socialist Republics satellite. It's curious how war criminals sometimes manipulate reality and history for their own use and benefit. Let's move on. As we said, in 1981, things changed in Bolivia. Barbie was arrested for fraud. Meanwhile, he admits he has nothing left. His son Klaus died in a car accident and his wife died of cancer. He has lived his life. He hasn't even turned 70 yet, but he doesn't regret anything. In 1983, as mentioned, Barbie was extradited to France. There are several charges hanging over his head. Massacres of hostages, arrest, and torture of innocent people, roundups, reprisals, deportations of both French partisans and Jews, execution by firing squad of hostages and prisoners, the death of Jean Moulin, the arrest and brutal torture of the White Rabbit. Theo Thomas, there's everything in his file. Among other things, it turns out that the FBI, the CIA, and even the United States Department of Justice have extensive files on him, hundreds of pages that confirm how in Washington. They knew very well where Klaus Barbie was and what he was doing, what he had done during the war, and what he had done afterwards. For the Americans and for the Bolivians, it's a scandal, a real scandal. Klaus Barbie is extradited to France. He faces the trial in a defiant manner. He refuses to be called by his real name, says his name is Klaus Altman, says he is not guilty, that the extradition was illegal, that he was, after all, a Bolivian citizen. This last statement was actually true. He had acquired citizenship many years ago, and in the end, he said that regarding all the things he was being accused of, all those monstrous charges, he had nothing to say. Some of the charges brought against Barbie would have been dropped during the trial because of a law passed to protect certain categories of people who had been involved in the events of Vichy France or French Algeria. Barbie's court-appointed lawyer, Jacques Verge, who was also a former communist activist, polemically asserted that his client's actions were no worse than those committed by the colonial powers all over the world. Curiously, Klaus Barbie, a Nazi, was ultimately defended by a former communist, perhaps a twist of historical fate. Before his conviction, Barbie even said, when I stand before God, then he'll be judged innocent. Funny. Who knows if God actually did? Human justice found Klaus Barbie guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity. Klaus Barbie died of leukemia in prison on September 25, 1991, 4 years after his conviction. He had not yet turned 78. 78 years spent mostly marked by violence, marked by blood. Innocent blood. The blood of children, workers, Jews, partisans, spies, ordinary soldiers, guerrillas, of Ernesto Che Guevara, of Monica Hertel, the blood of so many people. So then one has to ask, is it possible to forgive? Can forgiveness exist for such dark figures who have dedicated their lives to violence, oppression, murder, torture, the denial of any human principle? I can't answer. I'll let you decide. And when you hear about brutal torture, maybe from those who suffered it and managed to survive. Think that sometimes our human nature can bring out the worst. It can really bring out the monster that can lurk in any one of us. Think about it carefully.